Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you for your attention. It's time to get started with the next session. Akriti is going to talk about a whole bunch of geeky, fun tech stuff. She's a regular here. She was here last year. Heard from a whole bunch of participants here who were here last year that they loved her talk. And so we're very excited and lucky to have her here. Let's hear from Akriti.
Hi everyone, good evening. My name is Akriti Chadda, and today I'm going to be talking about revolutionizing search and the integration of generative AI. Like she said, a lot of buzzwords. That's what we do in tech now. As long as we mention machine learning, AI, generative AI now, we get a lot of funding and we all love it. Like she said, I was here last year, and last year I talked about the technical infrastructure behind search and relevance and how information retrieval actually works. And when I ended my talk, I talked about how ChatGPT was revolutionizing the world. And last year, when we had the WIDS conference, ChatGPT had come out like maybe 8 or 9 weeks before that, so not everyone was using it. But I think now, I'm sure all of you must have had some sort of exposure to not just ChatGPT, but also their API and also other large language models that are present. A little bit about me and why I'm here to give this talk. I am an applied scientist at Bing, so we do a lot of this work on an everyday basis at work, and I'd like to share some of that with all of you today. I do want to note that none of this is affiliated with work. This is something that I want to talk about personally. So none of what I talk today is something that Microsoft had asked me to talk about, although Bing is great and you should use Bing. So today we'll be talking about what search actually is, and then I'll go into how generative AI is actually getting used in search. We'll talk about some of the technical challenges that we face when we're trying to integrate all of these large language models into production so that people can use them. And then I want to leave you all with a few emerging trends in the field of applied machine learning and artificial intelligence, just to motivate all of you to explore more of this field in case you haven't already. This is what my search history looks a lot like right now. I know this is auto-suggest, but I just had a baby 8 weeks ago, so this is what I'm continuously working on. Thank you. Thank you so much. So this is essentially, I'm exposing myself right now. This is what a lot of my search history looks like. And when you think about search, what it actually is it's the process of finding some information that you want from a large variety of documents that might be there. In today's world, it's not just documents we might be looking for. We might be looking for images. We might be looking for databases. We might be looking for videos. I honestly, this is my first baby. I didn't know how to burp a baby, so I had to look a lot about if my baby's fussy and it's because he's colic, how do I burp my baby? So I wanted to look up videos. So that all comes under the big umbrella of search. Now, this book was a 2008. It's one of the seminal texts that we have in information retrieval by Manning. And they call search the process of finding material, usually documents of an unstructured nature, that satisfy an information need from within large collections, usually stored on a computer. Nobody really stores documents in a computer anymore. We're all working in the cloud, and nobody's just searching documents, like I said. So things have changed a lot, but the basis of the entire information retrieval field hasn't really changed. We're still looking for some information that we need from a large amount of data that is present, and the only thing that has changed in all of these years is that the amount of data that we have and the kind of data that we have has become exponential. It took me a very long while to get this screenshot, which didn't have anything from like Copilot or any sort of generative AI from any of the search engines. So I'm very proud of myself that I was able to do that. This is what traditional search would look like. There's a search bar. You put in your query. In this case, my query was, why is my baby spitting up so much? And under normal circumstances, until a few years ago, I would go through all of these links that were present here and then open them one by one and go down a rabbit hole of having too many tabs open on my laptop. And however strong my hard drive or my RAM is, I am going to run out of space, and then Safari is going to crash on me. It is just bound to happen. We don't have to do that anymore. I don't have that kind of time, that kind of energy to be going through so many tabs, especially at this stage in my life. So I'm very grateful I have something like Copilot. All I have to do is I have to give the question, why is my baby spitting up so much? And they're going to give me a very consolidated answer as to why that might be happening. Now, what essentially this is doing, this is me searching on a generative AI integrated into search platform, where they're able to take up all of the sources which might have the answer that I was looking for, which is why my baby is spitting up, and then consolidate that into a great, good-looking answer that I just have to read. However, I am a new mom, and I am extremely paranoid, so I do want the sources, even though I'm not going to go look at them. This also does that. It gives me all of the sources. But I also have follow-up questions. Like I said, I want to understand how to birth my baby. Okay, my baby's fussy. I know he's fussy. You've given me the reasons why he may be fussy, but I do want to fix it now. How do I do that? I could have a conversation with this agent, but they also give me some sort of recommendations as to what I can do. How can I soothe my baby after spitting up? What if my baby's in pain while spitting up? All valid questions, all questions I have in my mind, but this platform knows already why that is happening. So this is the sort of thing that I wanted to talk about today. Search in its most definitive way has changed. We're no longer hooking ourselves up to Google or Bing and trying to go through these hundreds of links, or like even the first 10 links that come to us on the first page, and go through all of them to find the information. Tech companies are making it easier and easier for us to do that, along with the help of generative AI. It's not just search on regular search engines and platforms. All of the other companies are also slowly and surely getting into this field. The first screenshot that you see here is from Amazon. My baby's spitting up. I need to understand what is it that I can spend money on to prevent my baby from spitting up, so I can go ahead and ask Amazon now. I don't have to go to the search bar. I can go to Rufus, which is their new AI, and I can ask, what products can you suggest me if you're spitting up? Now, how is Amazon able to do that? I want to talk about a little bit about how it is able to recommend particular products to me. So it understood what my query was, what I wanted to spend my money on, and then recommend particular products that they could have. I wasn't able to find a similar example on LinkedIn. It would be very weird if I was able to find a baby example on LinkedIn. I wasn't, but I still wanted to put this on here. I'm sure all of us who are present here have been networking all day. We've opened LinkedIn a bunch of times. There's a new feature on LinkedIn where for every post that is available, they are trying to suggest a question that you can ask the AI that they have. And in this case, this is a post from deeplearning.ai. And then it's about a short course on building multimodal search. We will be briefly talking about that today. And the question that it suggests is, how can RAG benefit professionals? So how is search, or how are all of these platforms able to suggest something that's so accurate? Where are they getting all of this information from? Now, I do want to go a little bit into how large language models work and where they're getting the information from. In their most nascent form, if you think about the oldest language models that were there, let's just say that, briefly, that they were trained on all of the data that is present on the internet. Think all of the web pages on the internet. Somehow somebody figured out a way to crawl up all of the pages that were present. There's a lot of pages on Wikipedia, so there's a lot of information on there. So all of Wikipedia was crawled. There's stuff on Amazon, there's stuff on Netflix. They were able to somehow get all of that information, put that into a database, train the large language models on them, and now I'm going to be able to query them. So the earlier GPT models that came out, which everyone thinks of as large language models when we talk about them, were trained on all of this information. And when you were querying them, or when you were asking them a question, or the way that we talk about it, you were giving them a prompt, what it was doing was it was essentially being creative. A generative model is trying to spit out words which may or may not make sense based on some probability. So just the way that you think about if I wanted to say my name is Akriti, you would think that if I was just giving the word my to a language model and it had to predict the next word, it would, with a very high probability, predict the word name. And that's how generative models work. They try to predict the words one by one by one. And so when you were querying older models like GPT-2 or GPT-3, what they were doing was just giving you a probabilistic word after word after word, and that would make a passage. And that's why sometimes the earlier models didn't actually make a lot of sense. They were also not able to give you real-time information as to what was happening around the world. And I have an example for you here. This is from GPT 3.5. If I asked it who won the Nobel Prize in Physics in 2024, even though you would assume that since we are trying to do search using generative AI and the large language models know everything, actually not really. Large language models on their own are frozen in time as to until when they were trained. And these large models take a lot of time, a lot of compute, a lot of resources, a lot of data to train. And of course, we can't really forget they take really, really, really long to train. So at some point, all of these companies have to freeze these models in time, and then you keep querying the same model again and again and again. But now the examples that I just showed you, I showed you the example of Amazon. Now imagine Amazon was using one of these large language models, whether or not they were using the ones from OpenAI or they were training their own language model. Imagine that they trained their language model and froze it, maybe say in the last week, and then they were using that to start recommending products to you. Now what happens if a vendor on Amazon added a product last week? They're at a loss. Amazon is going to be at a loss because what if it's a very important product that everyone is raving about now on the internet, so they're losing out on sales because that product is not going to be in their language model. Similarly, for LinkedIn, there was a recommendation about RAG, but RAG is a fairly new concept. Similarly, I don't know how many of you watched the OpenAI Spring update yesterday. We were talking about GPT-4o. Say the language model was frozen in time last week, it's not going to know about GPT-4o. Imagine going to LinkedIn and then seeing all of these recommendations and none about GPT-4o. That would be really weird. But the companies don't have the time or the resources or the money or the compute power to be able to train these large language models on an everyday basis. So how are they trying to keep themselves updated? How is search going to work if they can't be training these large language models on an everyday basis? This is where retrieval augmented generation comes in. In short, we're calling them RAGs. This might be something that you've heard about a lot today. If you've been talking about search, if you're working in the field of search and information retrieval, this is something that you're probably using every day. This is something you're talking about every day. For people like us who are working in the industry, we are even dreaming about it every day, trying to figure out how to implement these RAGs. But what exactly is it? Now, traditional search, if you look at the arrow below, if you were going to prompt large language models, what you do is you give it a prompt, how do I do X, and then it directly goes into the large language model, and then you usually get a response to do X, and this is the whole shebang that I was talking about, that it's just a probabilistic model. But if I wanted to give it more information about my particular domain, if Amazon wanted to put in products in there, if LinkedIn wanted to talk about all of the latest research that is happening in there, say I was a lawyer and my legal team wants to be really full of buzzwords and get some funding from the VCs, I have to introduce some sort of AI into my company. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say that I want an internal ChatGPT for me. And so all of these legal documents are going to be there in that particular search engine that I'm trying to create, which the lawyers just have to query and then they'll get an answer. So all of that extra information goes to this part of the knowledge base that is there. So what RAGs essentially are doing is that instead of trying to retrain your large language models from scratch, because no one has the time to do that, or the money to do that, we are trying to introduce an extra retrieval step where we're going to give it a very small database of important information, of relevant information that might be required for your particular users for search in your domain, and then figure out a way to retrieve documents or relevant documents from that, and then use that along with the LLMs to generate an answer that you can give to the user. In this case, for example, for Amazon, they would already have some pre-trained LLM that they have that's going to help them generate the beautiful answers that we see, but also it's going to have some database of products that it can keep updating very regularly. So every time a user prompts, it's not just using the LLM, it's also using this database that we have. Now, I've been going on and on about how it's time consuming and it is expensive and we don't have that kind of money and time, but how are we doing all of this retrieval from the knowledge base? Now, there has been research that is done that says that the relevance of documents, or how ChatGPT has been, or all of these retrieval and search platforms have been working, is that they care about only the top 5 or top 10 or top 20, or I think the top 100 documents that are retrieved. But that means we also care about how fast we can retrieve documents from this particular knowledge base. And we do that using dense passage retrieval. Now, what that does is that it takes the query that the user has and it takes all of the documents that are present in the database, finds embeddings for both of them, and then tries to find the similarity between those embeddings. The closer the embeddings are to each other, the closer the vectors are to each other. That means that they're similar to each other, and then it should use those passages when it's trying to return answers to the user. In this case, this would be product, instead of document, it would be like a product vector, and this would be a user query vector, and then we'd find the similarity, and that is how Amazon will be able to give users the products that they want. Now, technical challenges, I've been talking about them, so hopefully this is ingrained into your memories by now. There's data quality and data bias. A language model is only as good as the data as it is trained on. If you're giving it garbage data, it's going to give out garbage results. Any machine learning, garbage in, garbage out is something that we hear about all of the time. Model generalization. Now, it's difficult for something that Amazon is building to be used by LinkedIn for their purposes. So there is no one purpose general model that's going to work well. And if we had something like that, for example, older versions of GPT, they wouldn't work well for anyone. So it has to be a different model for everyone. Hallucinations. I gave a small example of how GPT was able to tell you, no, I don't know who won the Nobel Prize in 2024. That is a good response. It's being honest about it. But there's also chances that GPT will tell you, the Nobel Prize in 2025 was won by Jane Doe, just because it's a probabilistic model. Depending on the kind of data it was trained on, it could also give you garbage like that, and we don't want that happening. The last one is the most important. How do you decide that the data that is coming out, all of this probabilistic data that is coming out to you, is actually good? How are these answers evaluated? And in this field of data science, machine learning, applied science, whatever all of us do, the last step in any model that we build is so important, which is evaluation. How do you send this out to customers? How do you decide whether this is good or not? Now, with large language models and this generated text or generated images, it becomes really tricky, because how do you decide something is good or not? There's no metrics that are out there. Now, for things like machine translation, where you're using large language models to do translations, is a metric. There's a benchmark that has been created, which you can use to, so I'm going to butcher it while I'm trying to explain it. But think of it as you have the result from a different language, and you have the current language that you have the sentence in or the passage in, and there's a benchmark that has already been created. So the answers that are generated by a model can be evaluated against the benchmark that is already present. And similarly, for tasks like question answering, you can have a benchmark that is available. But for, say, something like product search, how do you decide whether a product that has been given out is good or not? So in a lot of these situations, evaluation is done using humans. And it was great maybe until a couple of months ago, when a lot of people were not using large language models to do their queries. But now, as the number of people and the number of users increase, as more number of companies start integrating these models into their everyday production use cases, it's becoming harder and harder for companies, one, to find judges, because honestly, they're scarce. And second, even if they did find them, to find the budget, to allocate the budget to be able to evaluate. So I think this is an ongoing discussion in the research community right now as to how can we find benchmarks to be evaluating all of these generated data that we have, whether it is text or whether it is image or whether it is videos for that matter, and how do we say that this is good and this is a model that is ready to go into production. And then there are some infrastructure challenges. I call them challenges, but I also think of them as trade-offs, because obviously you could have a lot of budgets, you could increase your computation cost, and that would help you reduce your latency and increase your scalability. But you could also choose to not scale it a lot, but still be extremely low latency, and that could also reduce your costs. So I guess if you have unlimited money, then you would get all of these, but if not, you would have to scale down on one of these things, and then you'd get the other two. When I started this talk, I said last year we talked about just information retrieval, and then I said ChatGPT is revolutionizing search. From my last talk until now, there have been lots of AI agents that have now come out that we can use. ChatGPT is also not using 2.5 anymore. We are at 4.0 as of yesterday. I actually had to update my talk last night, because I was like, oh, I have to mention this. I can't go and talk about generative AI and not do 4.0. If you haven't gone and seen this, it's a live demo from researchers at OpenAI. If you haven't seen it, I actually really want you to go and see it, because that will be motivation enough for you to go and explore more of how generative AI is actually going to change the world that we live in. If you had trouble using Alexa and Siri and got irritated just because it also couldn't tell you the weather properly, you should go and see how you're able to interrupt GPT-4o and be like, actually, I don't like your answer. Can you change it right now? And then actually, I'm going to show you a video of something that I'm working on, and then could you give me an answer based on what I'm writing on paper in real time? It's absolutely brilliant. I wouldn't have the time to show any snippets of it today, but if you have the time, please go ahead and do that. Not just that, I give you examples of all of the big companies that are using this. We've talked about consumer applications, B2C applications like ChatGPT. Perplexity is trying to build a search engine to beat Google at this point of time. Not just those, there's also a lot of other smaller startups which are consistently growing and are going to grow very big in the next couple of years because they have understood that generative AI is the future. They're trying to integrate all of these capabilities for smaller companies. The example that I gave for lawyers trying to make their own chat GPT and search within their firms is actually getting turned into a startup like this. So I hope that just understanding that this is the future, and if all of us were to work together and understand how the field is actually working and work together towards this, things like work on the evaluation of how to work on these models, things like how do we reduce the bias that we have in the data, how do we train these models better, this is going to be a great space to be working in the next couple of years. Thank you so much for coming today, and I'm looking forward to all of your questions.
Thanks for the great talk, and it was very interesting. I have one very generic question, especially like search usually go with ads, right? And then I'm not sure whether it's like a relevant topic for this talk specifically, but I was just wondering, how do you view like especially coming up with like GPT 4.0, like is there like how do you see like how ads integrate with these kinds of chatbot, and even like Alexa type of like chatbots?
I think it's already happening. Depending on which company that you're looking at, depending on the use case for that particular company, the goals or KPIs for that particular company, that's how they would integrate ads into their platform. If you go to Google right now and if you go to Bing right now, they also have the first page answers where they have some snippet of what Copilot has, but they also have the ads regularly just the way that they would show them. So I think there's place for both of the things if the company is getting all of their revenue, because it is difficult to generate revenue directly from search. Just users going and looking at answers, it's not going to generate any revenue. So I understand where the companies are trying to integrate ads into them. However, when it comes to large language models itself, like for example, if we were just looking at basic chat GPT and then trying to introduce ads into that, unless again we were doing some sort of RAG structure in there where the database that we have includes the user information and the ads information, I don't see another way, at least right now, to do it. But it's still happening. I don't think that ads are going away anytime soon, and I don't think they should. We live in a capitalist world. That's how the companies are making money. Otherwise, all of this research that is happening and all of this all of these cool things that are happening, there's one of two ways. Either we pay $20 a month to OpenAI, where they're able to build all of these models and give them to us, even though it looks like $20 is on the cheaper end just because they're getting a lot of funding from other sources to be able to run their computations. Or it's ads on platforms like Google and Bing, where then they're able to use that to fund other research that is happening. So I guess it's going to stick around for a while.
Yeah, thanks.
Yes.
Can you give some example on how to detect hallucination and what are the ways to handle it?
Oh, that's a very good question. So with hallucinations right now, if say as a user you were trying to, I actually came across this just yesterday. I'll give you an example. I was trying to prepare this talk, and I wanted to put in references to a lot of the papers that I was working on. So of course, being one, lazy, two, being sleep deprived with the new baby, I didn't put the references as I was making the slides. So what I decided was, I'm giving a talk on generative AI, maybe what I should do is paste the stuff that I have and then paste it onto ChatGPT and ask ChatGPT where all of this information is coming from. And my prompt looked something like, this is the information that I have. In the past, I have queried research papers and technical blogs from companies to be able to come up with this information. Can you link me back to those research papers and blogs? It did a really good job at finding research papers for me, just because the images come directly from research papers on RAGs and DPR, where they were, which is dense passage retrieval, and RAGs where they were actually mentioned. But then along with those, it also gave me, Introduction to RAGs by the Google Tech blog, or Introduction to DPR by the Hugging Face blog. And then for the papers, it was able to give me an actual hyperlink. But for the tech blogs, it showed it was a hyperlink, but it didn't link to anything. So it didn't open a different web page. And then I was like, okay, this is weird. Why? Like, is ChatGPT malfunctioning? And then I went and tried to search for the exact name of the blog and whether or not it's present, and it wasn't. So that's an example where ChatGPT was hallucinating because it just made up some answer because I said I took all of this information from a tech blog. It assumed that the prompt that I gave it was ground truth, where yes, she's taken all of this from a blog, and then it tried to just generate the name of a blog, which would go with the answer and be like, okay, this is where you got it from. Now, if I hadn't checked, I probably would have put that as a reference, and then it would have been a major boo-boo because that blog doesn't exist. On a larger scale, though, I think when you're using it as a consumer, it's a lot easier because you can go and cross-check, and you should go and cross-check. On a larger scale, I think human evaluation still is the best way to be able to figure out what hallucinations are. There is, again, like I said, this comes under the realm of evaluations, and there is a lot of research happening on trying to build benchmarks even for evaluations, and I think it's called Fever, where they're trying to verify whether or not the response that is generated by your large language model, one, is correct, like what the quality is, and then second, the quality of something that should even exist in the first place. So lots of ongoing research and something to look into.
Thank you. Can I ask a follow-up question? Do you think that there is anything that we can do to stop that hallucination to happen in the first place? Maybe some stacking model, filtration, or whatever that we can embed that in the AI model.
Yeah, I think fine-tuning your models, fine-tuning the large language models, and the addition of steps such as RAGs is sort of a way to reduce those hallucinations. So if the large language model doesn't have the information, to try to give it that added information, domain-specific information, to be able to reduce hallucinations there. That's one. But also, when the word prompt engineering first came out, I really hated it because I was like, this is not engineering. This is you trying to, make do with a bunch of words and change what they look like to be able to get an answer that you want. But as I've worked in the field more and more, prompt engineering is real. So if you are working on an application that requires you to use a large language model, you can actually engineer your prompt such that the amount of hallucinations that you get keeps reducing every time that you update your prompt. And that's something, again, to look at. If you are interested in prompt engineering, deeplearning.ai has a very short, I think, a 1-hour course on prompt engineering, which I think was great. That's also something to look into. Okay, thank you so much, everyone. Thanks a lot.